But I want to focus on what you said about the World Economic Forum and the title of the book, because as you mentioned, the title comes from the 8 predictions for the world in 2013, posted by the World Economic Forum on Twitter, now X, back in 2018, created from an article that they published in 2016. This isn't some conspiracy theory. Klaus Schwab says this all the time. You talk about Dr. Evil. I mean, some could say he looks like a central casting for a Bond villain. But nonetheless, you've got Klaus Schwab saying, as it is said in that list, you will owe nothing and you will be happy. Whatever you want, you will rent. So why don't you give us some background here on Klaus Schwab? We know he formed the World Economic Forum in 1971. But for those that aren't familiar with it, or just know it as the organization that puts together Davos, where the rich and powerful gather in the winter of every year. Give us the background that we need to understand here and why we need to be concerned by their agenda.
Yes. So with Klaus Schwab, the one piece of credit I'll give him is he's one of the most persistent individuals I've ever seen. He's had these messed up messages and he has been trying to push them, repackage them, repurpose them, entrench them, like you said, since 1971, when it was originally called the European Management Forum, I believe. And, as things shifted in sort of the geopolitical landscape, what was sort of these business ideas started to attract people from the political arena and the like. And somehow he just managed to sort of put himself in the middle of a lot of very powerful people. And so he was able to kind of keep putting out his message. One of the most interesting takeaways is that since that time in 1971, when he founded the European Management Forum, the WEF predecessor, he also put out a book. And this concept of the stakeholder kind of popped up at that point in time. And it really ties into everything that we're talking about here. He very clearly is trying to basically conflate the concept of a stakeholder with a shareholder. If you are a shareholder in something, in a company, for example, you've gotten that way because you've either put something at risk or, because you put something at risk. It could be your capital or it could be your time and your blood, sweat, and tears. But you have taken that risk and you are getting compensation for the risk. And that is why you are deriving benefit. His idea of a stakeholder is incredibly vague. It's anybody who wants to come along and basically free ride off of what a company or some other entity is doing and say, oh, well, I have an important stake in this. Well, you have taken no risk. You have done nothing. And he's been trying to conflate these issues, and we'll see them popping up over and over again as the EF has unfolded, and certain ideas which have been entrenched and populated by them, something like ESG, which we know has infected, all of corporate America, and we're just starting to get some pushback on. That goes back to this concept of, what is this quote unquote stakeholder that really doesn't have a stake in the asset, in the game, in the creation of something valuable, in taking that risk. And so I think that's probably the most important takeaway, is that you have these people who want to free ride on what other people are doing and, benefit off of their work and risk. And that has been inherent. But when you hear stakeholder, it sounds like they have a stake, but they really do not.
Give us a clearer picture of who these people are, as you say, because the World Economic Forum's tentacles reach far and wide. Give us a sense of who are the members of the World Economic Forum, why they're powerful, why we really should pay attention when Klaus Schwab says he has an agenda.
So the interesting thing is, if you look at their yearly event that they produce called Davos, or you go to their website and you look at some of the quote unquote thought leadership or articles, they are incredibly well connected with the who's who of world political leaders and companies. They have a list of partnerships, and you'll go through some of the biggest companies in the world, and you'll notice that they are named partners. You'll notice that there are lots of political leaders who have attended. And it's challenging to sort out who is just there because everybody else is there. And this is a way where I can make deals and get an ego boost and whatnot. And who's really carrying these bad ideas back and putting them into practice. One thing that I encourage everybody to look up is the video of Klaus Schwab at the Harvard Kennedy School of Government, when he talks about this program they have, the Young Global Leaders. And this is where they identify political leaders and sort of bring them into the WEF system. And you have people like Canada's Justin Trudeau and Chrystia Freeland, who have been part of these leaders. And he cites them. And he's like, when you look around, and I go to these things, you have to penetrate the cabinets. And I look around and I know all these people, and they've been part of the WEF the Global Leader Program. And so when you have somebody like Klaus Schwab say, we penetrate the cabinets, I'm not sure what else that might mean other than we penetrate the cabinets. So while this is supposed to be a non-governmental organization, an NGO, it seems like they're very, very entrenched in government. And when you see their ideas like the ESGs popping up with all of the publicly traded companies, with the most powerful business leaders in the world, then you start to say, well, clearly there's some connection here. This didn't just happen organically where everybody thought of this at the same time. It's coming from somewhere. And again, very persistent. He's been in the middle of all of this. And if you look at the different entities that are around him, some of them are there with the best of intentions, I'm sure. But a lot of them are taking this nonsense and bringing them back to their countries and trying to, quote unquote, effect change in a way that is sort of non-governmental central planning, which is as bad as any other type of central planning when you have a handful of people who are trying to make decisions for the masses because they think they're better or smarter or because they have more power. It's done very opaquely, and then that gets pushed into the system. The other thing I will say is that the WEF is very entrenched with the United Nations. And one of the things in my book, as I was researching all of these different issues, the names that kept popping up again were WEF, United Nations, and some others. And at some point, it's like, well, okay, maybe this is a coincidence. But when it's over and over and over again, I don't believe that's coincidental any longer.
Right. And you have these UN goals, which seem to align quite nicely with the World Economic Forum goals. But before we get more into that, how are they exerting power, though? How are they? So they bring in these leaders and they're just influencing them through thought. How is this power actually exerted and manifests itself in intangible ways that lead back to this agenda?
That's really a good question. I don't think it's as formal as some people might like to think it is. I think that you get people in a room and you say, this is, what we're going to push, and here's how it's going to benefit us, and go back and go to it. Something like ESG, which I keep bringing up again because it's just been such a big push, was such a clear grab for power and wealth and influence that, I don't know that there was a playbook that was put out and you have to do this thing. But by bringing in all of these key players, people who are influencing the choices of shareholders like, BlackRock and Larry Fink, who was a really big person in terms of bringing it, from a World Economic Forum discussion point into actually penetrating publicly traded companies. Now, of course, he's trying to distance himself from it, but that is the reality of how these things came to be. I think it's, here's how we can benefit. Here's the money and the power lines. And, everyone says, that sounds great. I'm on board. This is the new thing. And they each go out and put it out in their own way. But, it is this connection between these organizations that foster these sort of centrally planned bad ideas and lay out the benefits for the people who then bring them back and, make us subject to all of them.
Right. Centrally planned bad ideas, which work to erode people's freedom under the guise that it is for what they deem to be the greater good. You mentioned ESG, and that links to the idea of climate change and that agenda. And a number 4 on the list, you'll eat much less meat, an occasional treat, not a staple for the good of the environment and our health. So that's number 4 on the list there. But let's focus on number 2 on the list of the World Economic Forum agenda for 2030, because that is equally as disturbing as you will own a nothing and part of how this all fits in. And they say that the US will not be the world's leading superpower. A handful of countries will dominate. And you started to bring that up at the top of this interview. It's a topic that you break down in great detail in the book regarding the US losing its status as the superpower, as other empires have before it, like the Romans, like the Dutch, like the British. And you break that down in tremendous detail, the history of those empires, how they fell, and how the US has essentially abused the exorbitant privilege of having the global reserve currency. And you're saying that as the dollar life cycle comes to an end, as has been the fate of all reserve currencies, that the elites are positioning themselves for the Great Reset. So expand further on that idea.